For the past 7 years, my wife and I have been caregivers to my parents who have progressively struggled with dementia. This has also taught us many lessons in love. Let me give you an example of a typical day. I'd wake up, I'd go downstairs, and on my way, I'd do a smell test to see if there are any accidents waiting for me. And when I get down there, I would then wake up my parents, remove their soiled clothes, clean them up, change them, change the sheets, and then get ready for the day. You know, at this particular time, we had multiple appointments that were scheduled throughout the month. And on this day, this cold day in February, they had multiple doctor's appointments that were spread throughout the day in Center City, Philadelphia. At the same time, I was completing my practicum hours at the counseling center that was located right around the corner from the hospital. And this was in order to finish my doctoral studies. So I thought I had the perfect plan. I would take my parents to their appointments, go see some clients around the corner, come back, and everything would be great. The plan was working really smooth until we received a phone call from my father saying he can't find my mother. This is where a typical day turned into the worst day of my life. I was immediately blaming myself for leaving them and scared and nervous. I rushed over to check in and meet up with my father. And I said, "Where is Mom and why did you move?" He said that she went outside because she thought she saw me. And at that point in her disease, my mother would often wander from time to time, whether we were at home, at church, or somewhere else. Usually we'd be able to find her before she got too far. Unfortunately, on this day, that didn't happen. In the span of 8 hours, I searched multiple blocks downtown. I went to 3 different hospitals, 2 different police stations, as well as filled out the paperwork for an Amber Alert. Not to mention called family and friends to help us search. I was so overwhelmed and stressed, didn't even know what I could do. And as the time continued to go forward, I started to get even more worried because I knew that at every moment that passed, it could mean that she could be injured or worse, dead. You know, I was checking in with my wife, and she knew I was physically and emotionally exhausted. She said, "George, you should just come home, regroup, and we can go back out that night." She said that we had friends that were rallying around us, praying for us, and even willing to travel over an hour to help us search that night. So I decided to go home, and on my way, I received a phone call from a state trooper saying that he found my mom walking in the bitter cold on a major highway. I was so relieved, yet in a state of shock at the same time. This began a new phase of caregiving for us. But how could we rise to the challenge? How could we do more, be more? But despite the challenges, caregiving taught us many lessons.
What George just described is his mother's struggle with Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's is characterized by memory loss and cognitive decline, which prevents people ultimately from accomplishing even the simplest of tasks. It's the 6th leading cause of death in the US, affecting over 5 million Americans. In fact, 1 in 3 seniors dies of Alzheimer's or another dementia, and it's the only top 10 leading cause of death that cannot be prevented, cured, or even slowed. So what does this mean to all of us? It means that we all will be affected by this disease somehow. And for us, just as we started to get in a rhythm of caring for George's mother, we learned more about the disease, we started to attend support groups and volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association, we learned that his father also had dementia. The type of dementia that he has is called frontotemporal dementia, or FTD. And FTD can also be characterized by cognitive decline, but can have different symptoms. And typically what we experienced with him was more violent and aggressive behaviors. Things like hitting, kicking, and punching, things we would have never experienced prior to the disease. And now we realize that there had been signs. For instance, there had been a report of a fire earlier on the news. And one night, a few hours later, George's father came upstairs with some of his belongings, frantic, saying he needed to leave because of the fire. And despite the fact that we were all sitting around calmly talking and that there were no physical signs of a fire, it was very difficult to convince him otherwise. It was then we realized our caregiving journey had just multiplied.
You know, how many of you don't love your parents? I mean, the truth is, most of us love our parents and would probably do whatever we can to show them that love. That was the opportunity that we were given. You know, honestly, I probably shouldn't even be in front of you right now. I could easily be planting sugarcane or some office job in Maypen or somewhere else in Jamaica. Don't get me wrong, I love Jamaica and my Jamaican heritage. But I also know that because of my parents' love and sacrifice, I've had tremendous opportunities. Just to give you some understanding, my mother worked in a hospital for over 30 years as a patient care associate. And my father, he would go back and forth to Jamaica trying to earn a living as a farmer. They didn't have a lot of education, but even though with that, with their hard work, their sacrifice, I was able to earn an undergraduate degree and then eventually a doctorate degree. I mean, that's love. That's how much they cared about me, that they would do so much. You know, not only did I see that love in their hard work, but I saw it in many ways throughout my life. I would see my father where young kids in Jamaica didn't have money for lunch, and that he would give it to them, even if it was his last dollar. Or my mother, after working a long shift overnight, would come home, change clothes, and maybe go to another hospital to visit a friend or family member who was sick. Once again, learning about love. That throughout my life, I learned love from my parents. So how could I not love them when they needed it the most? How could I not give back to them in this moment? That's when we realize that the greatest lesson that caregiving can give us is to teach us that it's about love.
So they call us the sandwich generation because we're caring for our own young children while also caring for George's parents. It's an interesting juxtaposition to, on one hand, experience the joy of seeing our own children learn to walk and talk and express themselves, while on the other hand, seeing George's parents lose the ability to remember, to understand, and communicate. The skills that my children were gaining were the exact same skills my in-laws were losing. Let's take potty training, for example. We were teaching our children to respond to their bodily sensations so that they would understand when they needed to use the bathroom. My in-laws were becoming more incontinent and losing the ability to sense when they needed to go. I remember one evening celebrating our 2-year-old son as he went poop in the potty. And just a few minutes later, my father-in-law called me over to let me know that he had had an accident. His clothes were soiled and he needed to be changed. Within a span of minutes, I needed to change both my son and my father-in-law's soiled bodies. It was then that we began to realize that caregiving is also about learning to support people with dignity and grace, learning to protect George's parents and protect and provide for and anticipate their needs, learning to care for our own children while also caring for his parents, ultimately learning the true power of love.
Caregiving is about giving back, being willing to put somebody else's needs in front of your own. In 2013, over 15.5 caregivers gave about 17 million of unpaid care for their loved ones in the United States. I mean, some of you might say, well, how can I do that? How could I give more? I have classes, I have work, family responsibilities, and honestly, Candace and I, we thought about the same thing. We had just had 2 children, we were completing our doctoral programs, and at the same time, involved in our church or advocacy groups or other things. We thought, we don't know how we could do more. But when we really looked at it, we recognized that what we fully believe is that to whom much is given, much is required. That gave us the strength to take this opportunity to give back. Don't get me wrong, there were times it was inconvenient or difficult, where we wanted to sleep or wanted to do something else, or we felt pulled in 2 different directions, whether it's to care for our children or to care for my parents. But at the same time, we then began to recognize that this was a privilege. This was an honor to be able to care for people that loved in such a way, not only to me, not only to my wife, but to others. And so this chance, we were willing to take it, to give back the love that we received.
Caregiving allowed us to think about how we can do more. It inspired us to think about giving back as part of our family mantra. And for us, that meant participating in walks and other fundraising events to help increase awareness and raise money. And while it was easy to get sucked into the devastation of the disease, it also was important for us to recognize the great foundation and sacrifice that George's parents and all of our parents and loved ones have made for us. It compels us to give back. So maybe you may be immersed in classes, struggling with career choices, or dealing with relationship woes. But there's ways that you can give back. There's someone who needs you. They need your skills, your expertise, your support, your experiences. There's someone who needs you. Perhaps you could volunteer with an advocacy organization, or tutor a student, or call and offer words of encouragement and support to family members or friends. There's someone who needs you.
We've talked about throughout this journey, we've received help. And some of that help has come in really surprising ways. One of those areas was our children, that are 5-year-old daughter and 2-year-old son. And when we thought about it, we realized that this is actually a victory moment because the lessons that we've learned in love and care have already transferred to the next generation. To give you an example, my daughter would hear my mother who would say, "I want to go home." And when we're at the house, my mother would say that, but we knew that was a clue, right, that she was about to go to the door to try to head out. So my daughter would then run to the door, lean against the door, stretch her hands out and say, "No, Gigi, no, you can't go." This was her attempt to care for my mother, to love my mother, to protect my mother. This was a victory moment. Or our son, who is often the house comedian, would do something silly and then look at us and then say, "Show me your happy face." And at that moment, we wouldn't think about dementia. We wouldn't be stressed. We wouldn't be overwhelmed. We'd just be a family together, laughing, having a good time. A victory moment. You know, you might think that I don't have victory moments. I have too many things I'm worrying about, too many things that overwhelm me, too many classes or things that are stressful. That's how we thought at one point. But when we took a step back and we looked at it, we recognized that there's some positive things that are going on, even in the challenges. And that was our victory moment.
You know, caregiving for one person, much less two people with dementia, has come with its fair share of challenges. But hopefully, as you've heard, we've also learned a lot throughout this experiences. One of the greatest things that I've learned is to evolve in the way we think about ourselves and others. I remember seeing George's father being weak and frail and barely being able to walk with assistance from here to being able to almost leap over a gate simply because he believed he was his younger self. Wow. Your body actually responds to what you believe about yourself. This allowed me to think, well, what haven't I been able to do simply because I don't believe I can? What haven't you been able to do simply because you really don't believe you can? Remember, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right.
Imagine a world where we all are able to care for our loved ones or family members, where we're willing to take on these lessons that being a caregiver can teach us. For Candace and myself, those lessons were in love. And in that love, we recognized that we could learn about ourselves and about others, and that we had an opportunity to give back, and that we were honored to really follow the thought that to whom much is given, much is required.
We learned to celebrate our victory moments, find our happy faces, and evolve in the way we think about ourselves and others.
And although we feel the sadness and the pain of seeing my parents decline, we're also very thankful for this opportunity to care for them and to learn these lessons in love. Thank you.